prospects of being able to shatter the ceiling of human longevity. As everyone here knows who are interested in aging research, the life expectancy around the world and also the number of centenarians are increasing worldwide. But there is no proof that the maximum lifespan is changing at the same time. So that is, of course, thanks to antibiotics and better healthcare, and also we seem to live slightly healthier, so more people reach their late 80s. And here are a few decades of demographic tracking of supercentenarians by the gerontology research groups. So I think everybody here knows, but I will still point out that a supercentenarian is a person who has lived to 110. Some researchers define it as over 105, but most call it over 110. And as you can see, it gets really, really hard to live longer when you have finally reached the age of 110. So that is indicative of a ceiling to human longevity that has not been properly investigated for why it actually exists. So maximum lifespan is not changing. The age of 113 was actually achieved and proven already back in the 1920s. And then we had the outlier of Jean Camon back in 1997. And since then, the oldest living person on this planet is almost constantly 115 to 117 years old. And the mode of death, the most common age to die in the Western world, Europe and the United States, is about 86 to 88 years. So it's extremely similar both between countries and also very similar between males and females. There is not much change in the extremes of longevity, and also the most common age to die from an age-related disease. So obviously, if you exclude the drug addicts and the very obese people and the smokers, and you die of normal aging, so to speak, with bigger quotes, then you die at 86, 88, essentially. But aging research, it's a bit loosely defined what we actually mean when we talk about aging research. What is aging? Any type of disease that occurs in older age. What does it mean to avoid a specific disease versus dying from aging? What is slowing aging versus cutting a premature risk of death? What does it really mean? Because do centenarians really age slower, or do they just manage to avoid the particular things that, like atherosclerosis, that would have killed them in their 80s? How can we quantify that? And an inconvenient truth here in aging research is that there is a clear barrier to how much you can extend a lifespan by genetic and pharmaceutical interventions so far. People who, for example, back in 2004, we had a Björk, Ames dwarf mice who live almost 5 years instead of the normal slightly about 2 years. And that has, the record still stands at 1,819 days. And that is since 2004, and that's despite a lot of research that has been going on since then. And the H1, that's very famous, the C. elegans. You can double the life expectancy of a lifespan of a C. elegans tenfold, but you cannot enhance it further from there. There's no, when you have tried multiple cocktails, they don't produce any additional effect to each other at that point. So here are the Methuselahs. You can see in small C. elegans, it's very easy to do a tenfold life extension, but in mice they don't respond as well, and in rats respond even less well, and we should not assume that any of these proportions will apply to humans either. And another interesting fact, we talk a lot about functionality. It was an interesting talk about functionality yesterday, but when you get to 110, mortality does not depend on apparent shape. And that is a bit of a paradox, because all supercentenarians are very frail. I mean, they are very unhealthy compared to the people who are sitting here, but some of them are not so frail. They are able to walk around, they can go to the bathroom, they can cook a bit and take short walks. And others spend their final years just sleeping in a wheelchair. But the point is that the person who still walks around a bit does not have any longevity advantage compared to the person who is in an extremely frail state. There is a 98% mortality rate between 110 and 115, and that applies regardless of apparent shape. So that is a very interesting thing to investigate what is actually going on, because when someone is walking around at 110 and they can still live independently, you think maybe they can handle a few more extra years after that and live until you are in an extremely frail state, but that doesn't happen. When you get to that point, you die regardless of your level of frailty. And here are two examples of supercentenarians in very different shape, but they died at the same age and were photographed here at the same state. And how does this then relate to the hallmarks of aging? I show you hallmarks of aging again, despite everyone who has shown you it. Well, can we be able to track a specific pathology in these very old people to the hallmarks of aging and see why does it lead to death regardless of physiological state at that point? What evidence does exist now? So I'm going to make a comparison what problem we are talking about with the infamous glioblastoma brain tumor. It's a horrific disease, mostly occurring in younger people due to developmental errors in the brain. With glioblastoma, you have a 95% mortality rate within 5 years. That's about the same as turning 110. So being 110 is like receiving a glioblastoma diagnosis, and it is the most serious form of brain cancer that you can have. And treatment, well, I mean, you can try to delay glioblastoma and with radiation and the excision of the tumor, but they usually go back and the person dies. And in 110 years old, the problem is that there is no clinical testing. People are not testing anything in these really old people. When we are talking about aging interventions, we are mostly talking about young people. We don't go to the extremes. We don't focus on them a lot. And often when you do centenarian studies, you mix people who are 115 and 100, and it's extremely much more difficult to live to 115 and 100. So these people have certainly something special to investigate compared to people who die of 100, but many researchers do not include this in their studies. And the cure, well, both are incurable. And the research funding, glioblastoma gets funded. Of course, children who die, the parents get very upset, and it receives a lot of funding, but supercentenarian research is not particularly well funded. And of course, there have been some genome sequencing of supercentenarians, but they have not managed to find any particular gene that are associated with this. Well, we have ApoE, of course, in centenarians, but they are a very, very heterogeneous group, because it appears rather that they lack longevity is the default mode. If you don't run into problems, you live a long time. So there are many ways to avoid a problem. So what does this mean? It means that there's an opportunity for a rapid and robust proof of principle. You have this 98% mortality rate that has been fairly well established after decades of demographic tracking. So if you now will have a group of people who are 110 and you give them a treatment, you manage to track them down, and you are able to obtain consent, and you can give them any therapy that extends their life, you will have a very, very rapid proof that you are attacking fundamental aging process that apply to all of us, because you are not going to be conflated with atherosclerosis and the more common multimorbidity that you see in younger elderly, because often when you go and look at the younger elderly, they die from very specific diseases, and supercentenarians also die of specific diseases, but not diseases that we have currently classified in a very appropriate way. So what is the target then for a proof of principle? Is there evidence for anything to break this ceiling of human longevity that keeps existing decade after decade despite progress? Well, first of all, we had the Dr. Coles, who was a member of HEALS. He died in 2014, and he autopsied the 12 supercentenarians that he published the research from, and he found that they had a TTR that we have talked about before during this conference, in lots of TTR deposits in the cardiovascular system. And I don't know if you can say for certain that they actually died from it, but it's certainly not a good thing to have when you have a frail body in general. And of course, you have the therapies that we have already discussed against this. So if you could give supercentenarians a therapy and say against, for example, transient amyloidosis, and you see that instead of having a 98% 5-year mortality rate, you get like a 40% mortality rate or whatever, then you have very, very rapidly shown that you can apply therapies that limit lifespans for the very oldest of us. And it's not going to be one bullet, but there are several things that are more worth it to investigate. And another thing is immunosenescence. Most people here know about immunosenescence. We have here, for example, the thymus, it involutes, it becomes less efficient with time. And for example, you have a clonal expansion of stem cells. When you have autopsied the people who are well over 100, you have found that the white blood cells come from very few stem cell clones. So clonal expansion is very harmful in the immune system. And of course, you have all the cytomegalovirus and the herpes virus that are certainly not beneficial that the body is constantly fighting. And the evidence is also that many supercentenarians, they die from colds. Even if they are not bedridden, they are still walking around and able to function reasonably. Well, not compared to us, but reasonably. They still cannot tolerate any cold. And we also discussed the ECM, the extracellular matrix. We have an extreme loss of elastin with age. It's quite hard often to distinguish a supercentenarian from someone who is 90, but if you look closely, I have visited supercentenarians myself, so for example, they have almost like no skin when you look very close to them. The collagen, they have no collagen, they have no elastin, they are like almost transparent when you look at them. And that of course affects the blood vessels as well. And some of them have died from strokes, and you have the damaged cell receptors with age. It affects the lungs, and of course, all organs that are involved have elastin in them. So what clinical trials should we be pushing for? Because right now we have people who self-experiment with everything from senolytics to metformin, and they get a bit of anecdotal evidence and health improvements. And then we have to wait and see when will they die, when will we compare the data. It's all very diffuse, unclear, how do we interpret what. But here we have a 98% mortality rate within 5 years that is very, very well established after decades of data. So we have a target to go for that I have not seen others going for. So what can we actually do if we do a clinical trial here? We have the attain trial, the targeting aging with metformin. And the time is going to be very long. You're going to give it to relatively healthy people who are like 70 or 80 years old. You're going to see if they get a slightly reduced amount of cancer and heart disease. And of course, it's a very low risk. And you get proof of health benefits, but you need to track them until death, until you actually know how did we define what their aging actually was, how long would they have lived otherwise. But we don't have this radical thing because we don't have this mortality curve in the younger elderly. So in supercentenarians, any clinical trial will be short because you will rapidly get the proof of principle that your treatment actually attacked the fundamental limiting thing for lifespan. And the risk, well, they have very little to lose with informed consent. And the benefit is proof of life extension, that you crack a barrier that has existed for as long as we know. So, how will you be able to climb this Mount Improbable? To go from the so-called natural zone, or at least natural zone for the genetically privileged to live to 110, and go beyond that level. Of course, it's going to be many risks involved, and of course, a very old body is less able to tolerate any treatment that you give them. You have many side effects, and because of the general frailty and the loss of homeostasis in the body. But nevertheless, I think more studies should be done to be able to evaluate that we can actually affect the human lifespan, because aging becomes a very unclear topic, and what we actually mean clinically is not fully understood. But when we have this extreme mortality rate at the top, we can very, very rapidly assess any intervention. So thank you very much, and I'd like to finish by this quote by John Harris. As long as the life is of acceptable quality to the person whose life it is, We have a powerful, overriding imperative to save that life, and failing to do so makes us responsible for that person's death. So, thank you.